Okay. So very good evening and very good morning to all of you. My name is Hikari Ishido. I am professor of economics at Chiba University, Japan. So let me officiate or moderate today's seminar. So thank you so much for your participation for today. We are going to have this very important seminar, which is titled Positive Political Psychology International Seminar #1. Actually, this is one of its first kind. And then Professor Kobayashi is going to continue with this sort of academic investigation onward. So today's topic is wellness and fairness, psychology with social dimension. And we have invited a world-class scholar in the field of positive science, psychology, Professor Isaac Prilleltensky from Miami University. So it is our great honor to have you with us this evening for you, this morning for us. So thank you so much. Later, we'd like to hear from your insight. And then, okay, about today's schedule, we have 2 hours, and then several audience scholars and friends. So first, we'll be having our opening remark soon after this by our project leader, Prof.Jiro Mizushima. And then after that, in about 10 minutes time, there will be a lecture from Professor Isaac Prilleltensky. Right? And then after that, we will be inviting 2 discussants. First, we would like to invite Professor Akito Shimizu of Keio University, and then Professor Masaya Kobayashi from Chiba University. He's actually my colleague. And then after their discussions, we'll be having responses and open question and answering session. And then following that, we'll be having this closing remark. So that's the schedule for the next 2 hours. Would that be all right? So please unmute yourself, and unless you have to, speak up. Yeah, when it's your time, please, unmute yourself. So basically, please mute yourself. Yep, and then show up when you like to speak, or you can also use the chat line for posing any questions addressed to such and such person, right? Our experts for today, right? So, okay, so without further ado, we would like to first invite our project leader, Professor Jiro Mizushima, for his opening remark. So,
thank you, Professor Ishido. Hello, everyone, and hello, Professor Prilleltensky. My name is Jiro Mizushima, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Research Program of Chiba Studies on Global Affairs Society. It is a great honor that today we can welcome Professor Prilleltensky as the distinguished speaker for our online seminar. About 5 years ago, in November 2017, Professor Prilleltensky visited Chiba University and gave us a couple of lectures, one of which was a lecture for undergraduate students. I still remember that there attended more than 300 undergraduate students there who listened enthusiastically to the lecture about community well-being. I really hope that we could invite also this year Professor Prilleltensky to Chiba, but this time online, in the future in person. Please come to Chiba. Today, Professor Prilleltensky would give us a lecture about wellness, fairness, and worthiness. I think that worthiness is a quite important concept in our contemporary world, where we see growing inequality, social exclusion, and devastation by war. We have to admit that it has become more and more difficult to feel worthiness. In Japan, just a few days ago, as you might know, we had a tragic incident. We do not know the exact background of the murder. However, I think at least we could say that if we would like to have a safe and peaceful society, that society should be a fair society where everybody could feel the worthiness they deserve. If we feel we are living a life worthy of living, we would not hurt anyone. Instead, we learn to respect each other's life. Today's lecture would give us a clue to envisage such a society, I think. The lecture of Professor Prilleltensky is truly worthy of listening for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mizushima. So, okay, let us move on to the lecture itself. So we now wish to invite our today's lecturer, Professor Isaac Prilleltensky of University of Miami. Please look at the flyer of this seminar. So Professor Prilleltensky is a world-class scholar in the field of positive psychology and chairs a lot of courses, and then he has published so many books and journal articles. So I cannot, within this limited time, introduce fully about his contribution in this field. So let me directly invite Professor Prilleltensky for his lecture for us today. So the title of today's lecture is Wellness, Fairness, and Worthiness, Psychological Goods for the Common Good. So Professor Prilleltensky, please.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure that you can hear me okay, and you can see the slides okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. I would like to especially thank Professor Masaya Kobayashi for the kind invitation. I know that my presentation comes at a time when Japan is shocked by the killing of the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. I'm sorry to hear that political violence has come to your country. It's very unfortunate. Today, I'd like to talk about three aspects of the common good, which are relevant to all of us here in the US, in Japan, and everywhere. And I'll be discussing three psychological goods for the common good: wellness, fairness, and worthiness. My presentation has four main sections: wellness, worthiness, fairness, and a discussion of how all of them interact. We will first explore wellness. We will answer the questions: what is wellness and how to promote it? Wellness is a multidimensional construct. We call this model I COPE, and stands for interpersonal, community, occupational, physical, psychological, and economic well-being. There is a lot of evidence that the various domains reinforce one another. For example, interpersonal, occupational, and economic well-being improve physical and psychological well-being. Psychological well-being, in turn, enhances occupational, physical, and interpersonal well-being. In short, we define wellness as sustainable satisfaction of subjective and objective needs in the I COPE domains of life. Subjective needs include elements such as emotional support, sense of belonging, and feeling engaged. Objective needs include factors such as financial resources and access to healthcare. The I COPE model pertains to the well-being of individuals. When it comes to communities, there are a few key features that make them healthy and happy. We can see them on the screen, and they include exchange of gifts and favors, the permission to be human and show vulnerability, and the ability to make you feel welcome. In addition, healthy communities build associations, enhance mattering, reduce inequality, and status anxiety. When it comes to promoting personal wellness, there are some proven methods to do that. My research team developed a method of change based on 7 proven strategies. Together, they form the acronym BET-I-CAN, and they stand for behaviors, emotions, thoughts, interactions, context, awareness, and next steps. These 7 drivers work synergistically to promote well-being. Each one of the 7 drivers can be translated into action by some skills. For example, under behaviors, we teach people how to set goals and create positive habits. Under emotions, we teach people how to cultivate positive emotions and manage negative emotions. If you're interested in the theory, research, and practice of our method of change, you can review our Laughing Guides trilogy. The books combine humor with science to improve health and wellness. To test our theory of change, the BET-I-CAN theory, we created an online program consisting of videos with real actors, mini coaching sessions, video games, and reflection exercises. We believe that humor and fun can be motivating to pursue your personal well-being. So the program is called Fun for Wellness, and you can see the URL on the screen. Now, the program was evaluated in 2 randomized controlled trials with over 1,000 people, and the results show that people improve their interpersonal, physical, psychological, occupational, and community well-being. Remember the ICOPE domains. In addition, people improve mental and physical health, and people take more actions, concrete actions, to get healthier. Finally, people report improvements in self-efficacy as well, which is the belief that they can achieve their objectives. So I encourage you to try funforwellness.com and recommend it to others. It's free. When it comes to improving community wellness, it is important to identify first what has not worked. For the last 100 years, medical, psychological, political, and educational remedial efforts have concentrated on 4 wrong assumptions: that we can improve wellness by pathologizing people, by being reactive and arrogant, assuming that we know people's problems better than they do, and finally, by blaming people for their problems. I call this the drain approach because it sucks energy out of people. To overcome these problems, I recommend the SPEC approach, which is based on strengths, prevention, empowerment, and community change. There is a great deal of research showing that stereotypes and focusing on deficits does not help. Research on stereotype threats shows that when minorities are reminded of some stereotypes pertaining to their group, their performance declines. In medical and psychiatric services, there is a horrible history of abuse and disempowering of patients. Finally, there is a political and medical tradition of blaming people for their own misfortune instead of looking at the context of their lives. I believe that we must overcome these 4 problems to create healthy communities by focusing on people's strengths, preventing foreseeable problems, not just reacting to them, giving people control over their lives, that's empowerment, and focusing on the social conditions of their lives, not just individual effort. So now that we have spoken a little about wellness, and I focus just on two aspects, personal wellness and community wellness, now we can explore the second psychosocial good for the common good, which is worthiness or mattering. And we're going to explore what is worthiness and how we can improve it. Worthiness or mattering, feeling like you matter as a human being, that you're worthy, is about two things. It is about feeling valued and adding value. Worthiness or mattering, as I said, consists of feeling valued and adding value, as you can see on the light blue sphere in this wheel of mattering. We can feel valued by ourselves, that is the self portion of the wheel in orange. We can also feel valued by others at work and in the community. This is all on the left-hand side of the wheel. Feeling valued is about being appreciated, recognized, respected, and as the professor was talking in the introduction, about being treated with dignity. Adding value, in turn, on the right-hand side, is about making a contribution to yourself or others. And it is also about enriching your life or somebody else's life. Some examples include helping people, mastering a skill, developing your strengths, or assuming leadership roles in the community. Our own research demonstrates that all these individual segments of the wheel are independent and unique contributors to mattering. So the main message to remember is that mattering is about both feeling valued and adding value by self and others. When people in a community feel that they matter, they are more likely to experience self-compassion, autonomy, mastery, positive relations, overall and physical well-being. There are many important benefits that derive from feeling like you matter when you're treated with dignity and respect. We also found in our research that people with higher income, more education, and more social supports experience higher levels of worthiness. But when mattering is blocked, many problems emerge. For example, depression affects 322 million people around the world. Globally, 85% of workers are either not engaged or actively disengaged at work. This is globally. I assume that that's not the case in Japan, but we can talk about that later. Around the world, extreme ideologies are on the rise, posing a serious threat to liberal democracies. So we can ask ourselves the following question. What do depression, disengagement, and social disintegration have in common? They all result from lack of mattering. When we feel devalued, there are real psychological, organizational, and political consequences. Some consequences are internal. We get depressed. But some are external. We become aggressive. And in the United States, as you know, there are many mass shootings. And several studies have concluded that many of the people who engage in mass shooting, they have felt completely marginalized, excluded, bullied. So there is a relationship between lack of mattering and aggressive behavior. To compensate for feelings of unworthiness, Some people develop narcissistic tendencies. Others become quite entitled. Narcissism has reached epidemic proportions in recent decades. Inequality has also reached unprecedented levels. And despite the mounting evidence concerning global warming, we continue to ignore its consequences. So we can say that we live in a period of huge ecological entitlement. So let's ask ourselves the same question we asked before. What do narcissism, inequality, and ecological entitlement have in common? They reflect the belief that some lives are worth more than others. Some people feel overvalued, that it is okay to take up more resources regardless of the impact on other people. So, in contrast to the positive outcomes associated with mattering, when the need to feel valued is thwarted, we develop one of two types of problems. We feel either invisible or entitled. When the need to add value is frustrated, we develop either helplessness or ruthlessness. If you're interested in learning more about worthiness and mattering, you can have a look at our new book, How People Matter, Why It Affects Health, Happiness, Love, Work, and Society, which was published last year by Cambridge University Press. I should give credit to my co-author, my wife, Dr. Prilleltensky. Now that we have looked at wellness and worthiness, we can look at the third psychosocial good that we deem necessary for the common good, and that's fairness. Fairness is the practice of justice. Therefore, to be fair, we need to understand justice. There are multiple types of justice, but for my purposes today, I want to focus on only three: distributive, procedural, and corrective. Distributive justice is the fair and equitable allocation of power and outcomes in society. That includes universal access to high-quality education and healthcare, and opportunities for social mobility. Procedural justice, in turn, pertains to the enactment of fair processes. We typically define a fair process as one involving voice and choice. Finally, corrective justice is the act of addressing wrongdoing to restore fairness. Affirmative action, for example, advancing minority populations, and reparations after wars, like after the Holocaust, or reparations for slavery, these are matters of corrective justice. The typical definition of justice is to each his or her due. And this is what Miller has stated, and Michael Sandel has said, it's giving people what they deserve, giving each person his or her due. Now, the question is, how do we ascertain what is due a person? If fairness is so important, we need to know how to distribute it. So we can consider merit, need, or equality. These criteria, I should say, are not mutually exclusive. Context should determine what criterion must be preferred in each case. In social conditions of inequality, we must accord preference to needs over merit and ability, because people do not start the race of life in similar places. Under conditions of relative equality, where the gap between classes is not very pronounced, it is possible to favor merit and effort over needs. This is because people who work harder deserve recognition for their social contributions, provided, again, that there is relative equality and that we all start life, more or less, with similar opportunities and endowments. So finally, in a context of plenty of opportunities for everyone, it is possible that ability and effort will be the preferred choice. When inequality is not pronounced, individuals and societies achieve better outcomes. People do not object to inequalities based on ability and effort, though, provided there is fairness in the opportunities and the opportunities are distributed widely. It all depends on the context. So we cannot embrace merit, need, or equality blindly. So I live in the United States now. I grew up in Argentina and I lived many years in Israel, Canada, and Australia. And I have to say, most of these countries, including the US, they tend to believe that you advance yourself based strictly on merit. Some countries pay more attention to equality. For example, I lived in Canada and Australia, where there is a fairer distribution of resources as compared to the US, for example. So some countries, as we will see in a moment, do a much better job of promoting social justice and achieving better wellness outcomes. So now we know a little bit about wellness, fairness, and worthiness. I have argued that they are important psychosocial goods because they motivate individuals, groups, and citizens. People are motivated to pursue justice, happiness, and respect. These are three key parameters of any good society. People want to live in a fair society, pursue their own happiness, and feel respected by their fellow citizens. As I will try to show now, these three goods interact in special ways. Based on emerging evidence from our own studies and research by other teams, we created this model. As you can see on the left-hand side, there are four sources of fairness. Intrapersonal, I can be fair or unfair to myself. Interpersonal, that is to say fairness in relationships. Occupational and communal fairness. I can experience different levels of fairness in all. I was saying that fairness is affected by our relationships, by work, by the community where we live. And the level of fairness in all these domains is going to affect the level of worthiness that people feel, which is at the center of the model. So, as we said earlier, worthiness is nurtured by experiences of feeling valued and adding value, which are in constant interaction. The more we add value, the more we're likely to feel valued and recognized for our contributions. The more we experience worthiness, the higher our levels of wellness. This is not a unidirectional model, though, since wellness can also affect worthiness and fairness. We see this in the double-headed errors. So, for example, the more skilled I am interpersonally and occupationally, the happier I am in relationships, the higher my level of wellness and fairness in these domains, because if I am skilled interpersonally and occupationally, I can use these skills to help other people feel valued and increase fairness in relationships and in the workplace. So in this table, we provide content to the figure I just presented. So don't worry, it's a little busy, but I'm just going to focus on one aspect so that you can see how this works. So on the left-hand side, you can see the three types of justice we discussed earlier: distributive, procedural, and corrective. Across the top of the table, you can see four domains of wellness: intrapersonal, interpersonal, organizational, and communal. Inside the cells, you can see experiences identified as FV in green, which means feeling valued. So every time you see FV in green, it means feeling valued. FD in red means feeling devalued. AV means adding value in green. And finally, in red, AVD, adding value denied, no opportunities to add value. So we want in our lives and the lives of our fellow citizens more green experiences: self-regard, self-efficacy, secure attachment. We want to feel rewarded. We want to feel supported. We want to be engaged. So all these are green positive experiences. We want fewer red experiences. We don't want self-harm or helplessness. We don't want rejection or feel dominated or ignored. We don't want contempt and criticism, and we don't want to feel invisible, etc. So let me concentrate on one cell right now. So let's focus for a minute on the communal procedural cell. We can see that when procedural justice is present, people have voice and choice right here. When there is procedural justice at the community level, there is voice and choice. That is how they feel valued. When people have an opportunity to add value, there is participation and trust building right here. On the contrary, when people feel excluded, they are devalued and they cannot add value. When they cannot add value, they feel powerless. So this table overall contains over 50 ways in which worthiness is expressed across different domains of life. You can think of the green experiences as your guide to equity, diversity, inclusion, and you can think of the red experiences as exclusionary and marginalizing. So what have we done? We basically have shown that there are different types of justice and that there are different levels of analysis: intrapersonal, interpersonal, organizational, and communal. And within each one of these cells, we can see the expression of feeling like you matter, self-regard, self-efficacy, secure attachment, assertiveness, or feeling like you do not matter, feeling devalued and feeling helpless. Okay, so our work that I just presented is in line with the famous studies conducted by Wilkinson and Pickett, in which they explored how health and social problems vary across levels of income inequality. Their study found that more economic egalitarian countries report higher levels of life expectancy, math, literacy, trust, and social mobility, and lower levels of infant mortality, homicides, imprisonment, teenage births, and mental illness. So as I was saying earlier, there are countries that do a better job of reaching equality and improving social conditions. So this graph shows that problems increase as inequality increases. You can see Japan, Norway, Sweden, and Finland as the most egalitarian countries with the lowest levels of health and social problems. On the other extreme, on the upper right-hand corner of the figure, you can see the United States, which among rich nations is the one with the highest level of inequality and social problems. So you can see the distribution of rich countries along the continuum of inequality. Less inequality, fewer social problems, more inequality along this axis, more health and social problems. In a study we recently published, we hypothesized at the personal level, not at the country level yet, that experiences of fairness would impact wellness directly through the yellow arrow that you see, and indirectly through worthiness. That's the blue arrows that you see on the screen. And that is in fact what we found. Experiences of fairness make me feel worthy and uphold my dignity, while instances of injustice make me feel inferior and devalued. These, in turn, deeply affect our sense of wellness. That study showed that the relationship between fairness and wellness is mostly mediated through worthiness. In other words, the effect of fairness on wellness is mostly through the blue arrow. So what we found was that fairness impacts wellness primarily in the economic domain. When there is high levels of fairness, these conditions have a direct effect on economic wellness. But on most other domains of wellness, interpersonal, community, physical, occupational, psychological, the biggest impact is through worthiness. So what happens apparently is that when there is a sense of fairness, when people are treated with respect, people feel valued and they have opportunities to add value to themselves and society. And this, in turn, improves their wellness. So this study I'm showing you now was at the personal level. We asked individuals. So we just saw the mediating effect of worthiness in a study with individuals. We wanted to see if the same is true for entire countries. So to do that, we needed to find measures that come close to fairness, worthiness, and wellness at the national level. So we looked and we found parallel measures in a social justice index and measures of autonomy, social capital, and life satisfaction. So autonomy and social capital are proxy measures for adding value and feeling valued, and life satisfaction is a proxy measure for wellness. We conducted 2 studies, the first with 27 EU nations, and the second with 41 OECD countries over almost a decade. As a measure of fairness, we used the Social Justice Index developed by the Bertelsmann Stiftung Institute in Germany. And the index includes poverty prevention, access to education, labor market inclusion, social cohesion, lack of discrimination, health, and intergenerational justice. Here we see the relationship we found between social justice in the European Union and life satisfaction. So this was a longitudinal study. In other words, we had data going from 2008 to 2017, and the size of the spheres represent different tiers. Now, over a number of years, we saw in the purple that Denmark performed the best of all these countries in terms of social justice and life satisfaction. And this is congruent with several studies with different data sets showing that Denmark over time reports high levels of happiness. We also saw that Greece, over a period of years, again from 2008 to 2017, reported lower levels of social justice and life satisfaction. Here we see the impact of social justice on social capital in the European Union. Here again, Nordic countries perform the best. The higher the level of social justice, the higher the level of social capital. So overall, the results show that social justice predicts life satisfaction directly in the yellow arrow and indirectly through social capital and autonomy, which are proxies for feeling valued and adding value, as I said earlier. So to summarize, let me portray two types of culture. The first, the me culture, does not promote the common good. Unfortunately, this is the dominant philosophy of mattering in many Western nations. I call it the me culture. This culture is characterized by the following implicit precept. I have the right to feel valued so that I may be happy and well. There is a lot of evidence that societies are becoming more and more narcissistic because they are following this mantra. In contrast, the common good is advanced in we cultures. This type of culture organizes itself around the following principle. We all have the right and responsibility to feel valued and add value so that we may all experience wellness and fairness. In contrast to the dominant me culture, we culture balances rights with responsibilities, feeling valued with adding value, focus on self with focus on others. And finally, it balances wellness with fairness. We have seen this culture in places with more equality and social justice, as our own studies and the studies by Wilkinson and Pickett show. So to conclude, it's important to remember that there is no wellness without fairness or worthiness. Thank you so much. And before I stop sharing the screen, I want to acknowledge my collaborators in different countries. And if it's of interest to you, I can provide later the key references that I used for this presentation. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm stopping sharing the screen. Thank you.
Well, Thank you so much, Professor Isaac Prilleltensky, for your very insightful and deeply, very comprehensive lecture. It was very, profound, but easy to follow. Very clear-cut lecture on the importance of wellness, fairness, and also worthiness. So here in our country of Japan, like 3 days ago, we had this, upper house election, as was already mentioned by Professor Mizushima, our project leader. And then I was wondering, why this tragic incident in connection to ex-Prime Minister Abe happened? Who did this? And then, okay, after hearing your lecture, okay, if wellness, fairness, and worthiness had been there, that tragic incident, might not, or would not have happened. So anyway, but this is our reality here in Japan. And anyway, I learned quite a lot from your very insightful lecture. Thank you so much. Okay, so let us then move on to the discussion time. We have two discussants for today. The first discussant for us today is Professor Akito Shimazu of Keio University Shonan Fujisawa Campus, SFC. He is such a well-known scholar for his research into work engagement. So he will kindly be sharing with us his own insight. Okay, so thank you so much, Professor Shimazu. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind introduction. I really appreciate it. And first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Mizushima, Professor Kobayashi, and also Professor Ishido for the great opportunity to serve as a discussant in this very wonderful lecture by Professor Prilleltensky. It's my great honor to be here. And my name is Akito Shimazu from Keio University. I'm also a psychologist, and I'm studying occupational health psychology. My research focuses on well-being among workers. And my research career started with dealing with a so-called negative aspect of well-being, such as stress, anxiety, and depression, and whereby I focus on people's weakness. But about 15 years ago, I had the opportunity to stay at Utrecht University in the Netherlands for my sabbatical. And I started to study work engagement, which is a more positive aspect of well-being of workers. So I'm very interested in and excited by your lecture, and I learned a lot of things through your lecture. So let me share the screen to start my discussion. I'm not sure the screen's light or not. It's okay for you?
Yes, I can see. Slideshow mode?
Slideshow, not slideshow. Okay. Now is it okay?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes. And my discussion point is from a perspective of work engagement. Yeah, as you know, work engagement is defined as a positive, fulfilling work-related state of mind that is characterized by bigger dedication and absorption, which is the opposite aspect of burnout. Yes, as you can see, this is the circumplex model, and this is the application of circumplex model of emotion. Work engagement is characterized by present and high activation. In contrast, burnout is characterized by low activation and unpresent for work. And it is quite important to differentiate between work engagement and the workaholism. both concepts share the high activation component, but the important point to differentiate them is the this dimension, the present and unpresent. Workaholism is characterized by high activation but unpresent toward work. So let me introduce my previous study, empirical study. This is the empirical study to differentiate between work engagement and workaholism in terms of the relationship with outcomes. This is a 2-year follow-up study among workers, Japanese workers. So we measured work engagement by work engagement scale, and workaholism was measured by workaholism scale and consisting of 10 items. So basically, this is a baseline measurement. Work engagement and workaholism has a positive relationship between them, but weakly correlation between them. But we look at the 2 years outcome, the direction is opposite, totally different from each other in terms of direction. Work engagement has a negative correlation with future ill health and a positive relation with future life satisfaction and future job performance. But workaholism has a positive relation with the future ill self and a negative relation with future life satisfaction and no relationship between workaholism and the future job performance. This is the relation between workaholism and work engagement on one hand, and the self, their own self of well-being. But work engagement, workaholism has a relation between not only oneself, but also the partner's well-being. So this is our empirical study among dual earner couples with small children, preschool children. According to this empirical study, we found very interesting findings. Work engagement has a correlation, positive correlation with work-family facilitation and their own family satisfaction, and 1 year later also. But we found the positive correlation between couples. This is a kind of crossover effect. Crossover effect is a transmission effect between partners in terms of emotion, behavior, and attitude. This is the impact on their partner. And we found the impact on their own child. When fathers and mothers work engagement higher, then their own happiness will be higher and reducing their child difficulties. This is also crossover from father and mother then into their children. So as Professor mentioned, this is an important issue, not only person, individual, but also community and family unit. So when we measure work engagement, we can use utilized work engagement. So this is the questionnaire which is used all over the world, which has 17 item version, full version, short version, and ultra short version. Yes. And when we compare the scale score among 16 countries, we found very shocking, surprising result about this. Japanese workers has an extremely lower work engagement score among 16 countries. But please note that the sample is not representative sample. So there are some variables can be confounded. But we can find the similar findings in terms of positive emotion. When we look at the general self-efficacy Japan has the lowest self-efficacy score. And we can also the similar findings in terms of job satisfaction. We compare the job satisfaction score between Japanese workers and US workers. Japanese workers has lower job satisfaction score. And also, when we use the CSD means the screening tool, screening questionnaire to measure depression. A positive subscale mean score was significantly higher for the Japanese sample compared to US counterparts. But negative subscale mean score did not differ between the two samples. So we can have some a common bias exists in cross-cultural comparison of mental health due to the wording of the items, particular response to the positive items. Why do Japanese employees show low work engagement? So we may have the Japanese tendency to suppress positive affect expression may represent a socially desirable behavior in Japanese society. As the professor mentioned, we may have the we culture, and in Western country, they may have a me culture. So according to the cultural psychology, Professor Marcus and Kitayama, we Japanese people have the interdependent of view of self. In contrast, in Western countries, they have independent view of self. So interdependent view of self definition defined as connected with social context. Their important task is belonging, promote others' goals, and be indirect, lead as a mind. So basis of self-esteem is ability to adjust, retain self, maintain harmony with social context. But in contrast, independent view of self is defined as separate from social context, and their important task is be unique, promote on goals, be direct, and say what's on your mind. So their basis of self-esteem is ability to express self. So my discussion point is that 2 points. And first point is culture and well-being in international perspective. So I just wonder the relation between well-being and its drivers can differ according to culture. Of course, the Professor Prilleltensky referred to this point in your lecture. I'd like to ask your opinion and suggestion again in terms of this. And the second point is measurement of especially positive aspect of well-being. We may have some bias when we answer positive items of the questionnaire. So to facilitate the international collaboration and the comparison of study, what to do? I'd like to have your suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Shimazu, for your really insightful discussion points. And thank you so much for sharing your work engagement related issues. I very much learned from your lecture, another lecture. Thank you so much. So can we invite one more discussant and then return back to Professor Prilleltensky for his feedback comments? Would that be all right, Professor? Okay, so so shall we invite our second discussant, Professor Masaya Kobayashi. He's actually one of my colleagues at Chiba University. He's very much into this, positive political psychology. I'm sure he has a lot of issues to share with us today. So thank you so much, Professor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And also, thank you very much, Professor Prilleltensky, to give us a very impressive lectures, as well as in last time. So I share my slides with you. Okay, today I will talk something about wellness and fairness and justice under corona calamity in Japan, investigation from positive political psychology. And please allow me to speak in Japanese a bit for Japanese audience. 実は今回のこの企画というのは、この Psychology for the Common Good、The Interdependence of Citizenship, Justice and Well-being Across the Globe という、Frontiers in Psychology の、特集をプリレルテンスキー先生たちが、企画をして、私が、知らせを受けてそこに、書いたというところが、一つのきっかけになっています。先ほど、人先生からご紹介がありましたように、私たちの新しいプロジェクトで、ポジティブ・ポリティカル・サイコロジー、ポジティブ政治心理学という、シリーズの、セミナーを行おうとしているわけですけれども、この、特集の中で、私は2本の論文を書きました。同じようにプリレルテンスキー先生は、ゲストエディターであると同時に自分も関わった、論文を、2つほど出していらっしゃって、この、スライドにある、論文、下の方の論文が今日のプレゼンテーションに非常に関係しています。そして先ほどお話ありましたように、我々は2017年にウェルネス・フェアネスという、スピーチをプリレルテンスキー先生にしていただいていて、その、記録が、スライドにあるような、英語の、研究エッセイ、あるいは、日本語の、翻訳として皆さんが読むことができます。もし今日の話を聞かれて関心がある方は、ぜひ前回のものもご覧いただければというふうに思います。そこで私はですね、こういった今までの議論を踏まえて、今日のプリレルテンスキーの先生の、議論をごく簡単に今要約をしながら、政治哲学とか、あるいはそれに関係する我々の研究の観点からの質問をしてみたいというふうに思います。このスライドは私の先ほど掲載された論文の中の一つの図で、ポジティブとネガティブというのを縦軸に、そして横軸にプライベート&パブリックというのを置いていて、現在のポジティブサイコロジー、あるいは今までの心理学を整理したものです。ポジティブ、心理学というのは最近急速に今展開をしていますけれども、これまでの研究は主として、左側のですね、プライベート&インディビジュアルな方向ですね、こちらの方に力点があったと。しかし、社会科学という観点から見ると、パブリックでコレクティブな、そういった方向の研究が今後進展してほしいというふうに私は思っていまして、そういった研究をですね、ポジティブなコレクティブサイコロジー、そして政治に関してはポジティブポリティカルサイコロジーというふうに呼んだわけです。そういう観点から私の初めの論文では、政治哲学を今お話ししたようなポジティブ、心理学との関係において、整理しつつ、この両者の共同というものを推薦するという枠組みを書きました。このスライドには、例えばリバタリアリズム、リベラリズム、功利主義、そしてコミュニティリズムというような、今日の代表的な政治哲学が、そういったフレームワークの中でどのように続けられるかということが説明してあります。こういった議論はですね、すでに発表された論文の中に掲載されていますので、もしご関心の方はご覧いただければありがたいと思っております。そして、今日の初めの私の議論は、プリレルテンスキー先生の、ウェルネスの話ですね。そこから始めて、順番に先生の議論をたどりつつ質問をしていきたいというふうに思います。でプリレルテンスキー先生はお話になったような ICORP という、メジャーですね、測定法を、提案されて、そういった観点から継続的な研究をしています。私も、前回先生がいらっしゃった時にもそういうお話をされたので、その後先生の、こういった計測法を使いながら経験的な研究を、していますので、そういったお話も今日はしていきたいと思っています。このセミナーにいらっしゃった方々の中で、ポジティブ心理学に関心がある方々は、例えばその創始者であるセリグマン教授の パーマというモデルをよくご存知の人が多いと思うわけですね。しかし、プリレルテンスキー先生は、それとはまた独立して、非常に、オリジナルな、そして非常に、貴重な、考え方というものを集約をされて、それを先ほど言ったアイコープという形で、計測しているわけですけれども、私の観点から見ると、このアイコープというのは、パーソナル、そしてリレーショナル、そしてソシオコミュニティシステム、そしてエコノミックシステム、こういったいろいろな、ドメインを計測するという点で非常に優れていて、私自身も経験的に研究して、その価値というものを非常に高く感じています。そして私は政治に関心がありますので、それにプラスアルファして政治システムのポリティカルウェルビーイングとか、文化システムのカルチュアルウェルビーイング、こういったものも計測の中に入れつつ、こういったものを活用して、コモングッドというもののアプローチですね、経験的な研究に近づこうというふうに考えております。そして、プリレルテンスキー先生のパーソナルウェルビーイングネスの議論、これを Bet I Can という言葉に集約されていましたけれども、これをパーマとの関係において、考察してみたものがこのスライドです。パーマにおいて、例えば、エモーションとか、あるいはリレーション、アチーブメント、こういったものがこの Bet I Can の中のエモーション、インタアクションズ、ビヘイビアというものに大体相当していると思いますし、さらに、セリグマンたちはハピネスフォーミュラという言葉で、幸福の度合い、ウェルビーイングの度合いというのは、遺伝子的な要素と、それから環境と、そして自発的な意思によって、決まるという議論をしていますけれども、プリレルテンスキー先生の thoughts とかコンテクストとかアウェアネスですね、こういったものはかなりこれに対応していると。アウェアネスはこの中に見当たりませんでしたけれども、こういった方法を使って、ウェルネスをより良くしていくというアプローチを展開をしているわけです。Professor Prilleltensky, I has just explained the central point of your theory of I cope and Bet I can. So my question, second is, how about meaning? Because in other models, such as PARMA, there is a component of meaning, which is very important. I think the meaning has some relation with your idea of worthiness or mattering. So I wonder how or why you replace meaning with worthiness or mattering. This is my second question. And this is the model of community awareness. 先ほどの話を少し日本語で続けますと、ピエルセンスキー先生はやはりポジティブなアプローチというものも強調をしていらっしゃって、そして、その中で例えばストレングスとかエンパワーメントですね、そういったものを、挙げていらっしゃいます。そしてさらにプリベンションとコミュニティチェンジというものを SPSES ですね、スペックという言葉でまとめていらっしゃるわけですよね。で、当然、この、コミュナルなアプローチの他にですね、先ほど挙げたようなさまざまな、コレクティブなウェルネスというのを考えていらっしゃると思うんですけれども、特にコミュニティというものに注目して、コミュニティウェルネスの話を、今日まとめてされました。というのは、プリレルテンスキー先生は、コミュニティ心理学の世界的権威でいらっしゃって、これが、ある意味では一番初めの重要な問題関心であったからということですね。そこで私としてはですね、ここから英語にします。And I am a political philosopher, so I'm interested in political philosophy, such as communitarianism. So the emphasis of Professor Prilleltensky on the idea of community wellness reminds me of a communitarian construction. Obviously, there is the individual well-being is important as well as collective well-being. So Professor Prilleltensky's theory is quite in tune with communitarian or liberal communitarian construction. So my second question is Professor Prilleltensky today uses the word of wellness. But in ICORP, you use the word of well-being. I think there is a similar meaning between the two, but is there any difference of meaning between well-being and wellness? This is my second question. Now, I will a bit introduce our research using ICORP measure. This is the summary of 3 surveys under corona calamity. As you see, the survey 1, survey 2, survey 3, the number has decreases. So this number was measured by SWLS. That's the world's most standard well-being scale. So let's see the result used by measure of ICOP. So in various domains of life, we can clearly see the continuous decline of well-being in each domain. It is very important to see the fact by using the ICOP measure. So obviously, this result is similar to the result of SWLS or other measures, but owing to the measure of ICOP, we can more clearly see the implications or the present direction of well-being in the present Japan. And the second point is about worthiness and values. And worthiness or mattering is a very impressive and new concept proposed by Professor Prilleltensky. So I will focus on these concepts secondly. And worthiness is defined as experiences of feeling valued and adding value. This is a bit difficult to translate into Japanese, so I put my temporary translation in this slide. So my various questions centers on this point, or worthiness. The question 1, this is very important to push forward the idea of worthiness. So my question is, why did you pay attention to worthiness or mattering at first? And the second question is, what is the relationship between worthiness and meaning? And this is obviously the same question as I said. That's why I put this question 2. The question 3 is there any relationship with value systems? Because the worthiness is defined as experiences of feeling valued or adding value. So the value is very important in the definition. In particular, with belonging or being recognized in Maslow's needs hierarchy. So I wonder there is some relation with such kind of value system ideas or theory. And the question 4, your speeches has already used the word of the dignity, but seeing your slides, I remember the word of dignity, which is very important in political philosophy. So the question is, what is the relationship between worthiness and dignity? And question 5 is, your presentation has already mentioned is a very important implication to understanding present politics in the world, including Japan. So feeling devalued is related to depression, disengagement, and nationalism in your slides. Is this associated with recent political phenomena such as populism and authoritarianism in the world? This trend can be seen in, for example, United States, Britain, and those mothering very atypical democratic countries, and also Eastern Asia, including Japan. So this is my 5th question. And I will a bit introduce our research of mental state recent 2 years. As this slide shows, people's mental state decreases, as I said, but there are some people who have become more positive. So I can see the bipolarization with regard to people's mental state. This is a fresh finding for myself, so I somehow are interested in this phenomenon. And this slide shows that people whose bonds with family and friends have become somewhat stronger are a little more than people whose bonds have become weaker. Because of the influence of COVID-19, some people cannot go out. side. So I suppose there are some kind of connection within family. This is what this slide shows, I think. And this slide shows value changes in the survey first and third. And I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs in this survey. So this survey shows there are some value changes with towards both directions. First direction is for post-material values, that is related to self-transcendence or spirituality. The other trend is for materialistic values, such as safety need and economy. So here we can see as well the trend or currents with towards both directions. And so I think the well-being and value systems have both directions, I think. So well-being decline and bipolarization of well-being values we can see, I think, by our own research and using your ICOP measure. And so this research is related to value systems. So my question is the relation between value systems and your idea of mattering. The third point is fairness. Your presentation quite clearly summarizes the idea of fairness and justice. Our project centers on the idea of justice and fairness. So I push forward my own idea of fairness. So I would like to relate our theory with your presentation. And in your presentation, fairness and is related to need, equality, unequality, and merit. And this is related to welfare and egalitarian liberalism and communitarianism pushed forward by such as Michelson and Dell. And you said that our context concerning equality influences the priority between need and equity or merit. I think this is quite reasonable, and I can very catch the importance of your argument. So my question is that is there empirical evidence? Because you talked rather philosophically or normatively. So my question is the relation between your normative idea and empirical evidence. My own theory or idea with regard to fairness is that there are 4 elements. The first element is compliance with the rules and procedures. Second element is equal respect, for example, by a Kantian ideology or a philosophy. The third element is integrity of social practice. That is related to ethical axis of fairness. And a fourth dimension is reciprocity, which is related to welfare axis or happiness. So I summarize various arguments with regard to fairness into these 4 dimensions. And so from my own perspective, your argument today is the objective level in the second dimension, that is equality, influences the importance of the third dimension, that is ethical fairness, such as equity or merit. And so my only meritability focus, this is libertarianism. In contrast, socialism or egalitarian liberalism focuses on mainly needs. So your argument today is basically corresponds to my version of liberal communitarianism. So I again realize that your argument is quite similar to communitarianism. This is the slide in my English article, the first article. I summarizes various representative political philosophies like this, especially as for well-being, citizenship, and justice. Actually, the first this idea was pushed forward in Professor Prilleltensky's first visit to Japan. According to his own advice at the time, I refined this figure. So my second paper deals with the interrelationship among citizenship, justice, and well-being in Japan. From the study, I conclude there is a comparative plausibility of communitarian assumption. So this finding is in tune with Professor Prilleltensky's today's argument, the priority between needs and merit. So my question is that is there empirical evidence? That's it. The fourth theme is wellness and fairness in Japan. And let me first introduce our research of the comparison of average values of indicators by income. So this slide shows there is health disparity. Income inequality corresponds to the disparity of physical and psychological well-being measured by PAMA and ICOP. So 2 on the right was measured by ICOP. So I wrote the physical well-being and psychological well-being measured by ICOP. So this slide shows that the income level quite responds to these 2 well-being. The survey 3 also demonstrates the same result. So from these studies, I argue that there are 2 factors, biological factors such as foods and exercise. Another factor, socio-economic factors, includes economy, society, and politics. Both factors influences wellness. Wellness includes physical wellness and psychological wellness. So our multi-regression analysis confirms these influence, and in particular, politics includes fairness and justice. So fairness or justice influences wellness. So this is quite similar conclusion introduced by Professor Prilleltensky today. So we are now writing the main arguments like this. So this is the paper interpretation by myself and Ishido and others in our member. And as for justice and fairness and citizenship, which both 2 increases well-being. This is also the conclusion from our survey. And this influence is related also the change of mental state or feeling during the COVID-19 era. As I said, well-being has correlation with justice and fairness, and politics and economics, that is fairness and income, are negatively correlated with negative direction. So and the same result was found in 3 surveys. These are the statistical results from these surveys. I skipped these statistical details. So justice and fairness facilitate the positive change and suppress the negative change. So I conclude that justice and fairness is related to not only with the level of wellness, but also the change of mood or feeling. And this statistical analysis shows the correlation between justice, fairness, and change of mood. And so the 3 surveys confirms this conclusion. So justice, fairness, and citizenship may contribute to well-being and a positive or less negative change of feeling. This is the conclusion from our survey. So I think we can see empirically by our own survey that there are a relation between fairness and justice and wellness. I'm afraid that we have not examined the worthiness, but our conclusion is in tune with the argument by Professor Prilleltensky. So my seventh question is that what are direct and indirect through worthiness inferences of fairness? I raised this question only seeing the slides. Today's presentation clearly explains these kinds of inferences. So I push another question is that is there empirical? I suppose that there are empirical evidence between direct and indirect inferences. So could you please a bit explain these your arguments? This is my seventh question. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kobayashi, for your briefing first in Japanese and then asking of questions, 7 questions addressed to Professor Prilleltensky. Right. So, okay. So, can we have the first round of feedback comment from Professor Prilleltensky, please? But then, after his kind reaction, we would like to also invite, comments and questions from the audience, because you are valued. The participants are valued, and you can definitely add value to today's seminar. So, if you could use a chat line box to type in your comments or question while Professor Prilleltensky is kindly making his own first round of remark. Would that be all right? Okay, thank you very much. So Professor Prilleltensky, please, for your feedback comment. First round, please.
I thank both presenters for their very deep and insightful observations on my presentation. Professor Shimizu and Professor Kobayashi for looking very deeply at my presentation and combining their own insights with their own really exceptional work. So this is a really very enjoyable opportunity for me to learn from you and your work and how it connects to my presentation. So there were many questions presented. Professor Shimizu presented 2. Professor Kobayashi asked 7 questions. So I will just briefly touch on them because we want the audience to participate as well. You have given me a lot of food for thought, but let me address a few questions. So regarding Professor Shimizu's question about culture and well-being, I think you already made the point very clearly that culture has a big impact on well-being. And I often remember some paradoxes. For example, in the early part of this century, both Colombia and Mexico reported some of the highest levels of happiness in the world. This was at the same time that they were experiencing a great deal of violence and turmoil and kidnappings in their countries. And the reason for their high levels of well-being have a lot to do with their culture, a culture of family support, strong social networks, social support. And that is just for me one clear example of how some objective measures like economic measures, violence, killings can go in a bad direction, but at the same time, there are other important aspects that go in the opposite, positive direction, which reminds me that in the well-being area, there are a lot of compensating factors, a lot of compensatory factors. As you pointed out, in Japan, there is an interdependent view of the self, which in my conceptualization comes closer to a we culture. I think you also showed that it interacts with another Japanese feature of the culture, which is not to exhibit too many positive emotions. So there is an interesting interaction there. So people may be experiencing high levels of social support, living in harmony with the society, with the family. But there is also this interesting combination where people are hesitant to display too many emotions in public, I guess. So that's very, very interesting. With regards to your question about how to formulate items to measure this in a comparative way, that's a serious challenge because of what you just explained, that some people may be hesitant to show a lot of emotions in public or report in a survey, which leads us to the need to have grassroots conceptualizations of happiness that are tied to each unique country, right? So what is the Japanese conceptualization of happiness, which may not be easily comparable to happiness in the US, for example, where people are taught to express emotions. And I think there's probably a positive bias in the US where people tend to exaggerate how happy they are. Because there is great value in being happy and being effusive and all of that. Now, let me address some of the questions by Professor Kobayashi. The first one having to do with meaning. What's the relationship between mattering and meaning? And in my view, I wasn't talking about mattering when I came to Japan in November of 2017. This is something that I've been developing the last few years. And the more I read different literatures, and the more I engage in practice, so in addition to being a community psychologist, I was an administrator in higher education. I was a dean of a school for 12 years. I was vice provost for institutional culture for 5 years. So I had to read a lot on organizational development, organizational culture, leadership, etc. And I have a background in clinical child psychology. So in short, the more I read, the more I practice, leadership, psychology, community, well-being, etc., I realized that meaning is derived from two related experiences. One is feeling valued, and two is adding value. And adding value is especially important to meaning because, as the saying goes, meaning is in the making. You have to do something to derive meaning. Meaning doesn't derive just from being passive. Maybe some people really enjoy adulation and appreciation. They say, oh, how great you are. But doesn't last too long, because in order to experience meaning, we have to be engaged. And that's part of adding value. I'm adding value to myself or others in the community. Some people develop their own skills. They study a new language. They become a great musician. They practice sports. Whatever the domain is, they make meaning by adding value, which is 50% of the equation. The other 50% is feeling valued, because if I contribute to society, but nobody pays attention to me, and I feel invisible, and I feel forgotten, I don't think I'm going to feel that my efforts are appreciated. So that relates to the question by Professor Kobayashi, where is this interest in mattering coming from? And it really is based on theory, research, and practice. And just by being a leader in higher education, when I was a vice provost, we had this mega project at the University of Miami to improve the well-being of our employees. And so I had opportunity to talk to many employees and many people. I consulted with community organizations outside the university, and I just realized that people are motivated by two experiences: feeling valued and adding value. And interestingly, recently, my work has come into contact with Professor Aryeh Kruglansky, who is an Israeli working in Maryland, the University of Maryland, and he developed what's called significance quest theory. And what is significance quest theory? Basically, he says that people are motivated in life by feeling significance. What I'm saying mattering. I'm just adding to significance these two components, feeling valued and adding value. So it's really, this interest comes from a scholarly interest and practice interest. I think feeling valued encompasses so much, attachment, love, belonging, social support, and adding value relates to self-determination theory, feeling competent, autonomy. It relates to organizational development theory, work of Schaufeli, that Professor Shimizu was talking about, which is vigor, engagement. All of this is about adding value. So I would like to say that mattering is a transdisciplinary construct that subsumes underneath a lot of existing theories. So I like feeling valued and adding value because it summarizes a great deal that has been done in many fields. Okay, so moving on to other questions. What's the relationship with dignity? Well, dignity is feeling respected. And again, I may be faulted for seeing the world through the mattering and worthiness lens right now, but some people want to be respected, not just for who they are, but also for what they do. And so there is something in the business literature they call basic respect and earned respect. So everybody is owed respect, dignity, because you're a human being, right? Because we're all equal human beings, we're owed respect. But there is also earned respect. And earned respect derives from adding value to the community. So when I add value to the community, I go one step above owed respect, which all of us deserve, to people recognizing the contributions that somebody else is making. So I see a very close relationship between dignity and mattering. And I think that mattering adds to dignity this important distinction. Feeling valued is only 50% of dignity. You feel valued when you're also respected for what you are adding. And I have to say, there is work by other people, especially there is a team by Baumeister, Seligman, and other colleagues in the University of Pennsylvania who have developed an organizational mattering scale. And that scale aligns with feeling valued and adding value. They call it recognition for feeling valued and impact for adding value. So my work is in line with other theorists, Kruglansky, Seligman, Baumeister, who are talking about significance and they're talking about mattering. So I could expand more, but I don't want to run out of time. So let me stop. I know Professor Kobayashi and and Professor Shimizu, we can continue the conversation offline, but I really would like to give in the last 20 minutes an opportunity to other people to ask questions and make comments. So I hope this is a beginning of a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Prilleltensky, for your feedback comment. So yes, as he mentioned, yes, we have the occasion, all of us, because we are valued and we can add value to this community for today. So okay, and I have this list of participants for today. Several very renowned scholars and professors participating. So if you have any comments or questions, please add to the chat line. We have one entry already. Okay, this person. Okay, I know him. Okay, Mr. Alfonso Torero from Mexico. Thank you so much for your participation. Would you like to address your question directly to Professor Prilleltensky by showing up? Yeah, maybe that's better. No, Mr.
Okay, yes, it's
Okay,
fine. Okay, I wrote it's a comment that I was reflecting about my own life. So I know these are generalizations. As you said, cultural factors had also a lot to do with how we perceive our wellness or what we value the most. So the first one is I heard that you described that those people dislike criticism, and of course I agree. Like we don't like to be constantly criticized, but at the same time I believe that criticism can have a great effect on us. I have changed bad habits and attitudes after receiving harsh feedback. In fact, I believe that without a direct feedback, I will have not changed at all. So what do you think about that?
About giving feedback and getting feedback, is that your question, Alfonso?
I believe it's just a comment related to we don't like to be criticized, right? Yeah. Like being constantly criticized can affect our self-esteem, our self-worth, etc.
Yes.
But we cannot generalize the bad effect of criticism, because I believe that sometimes just with a very harsh critic, you can change. You can really change or find.
I understand
that you need to really change something that is bad in you, for example.
I understand. I think I understand the question. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And I think there is a difference between criticism and feedback. So criticism is feedback that doesn't necessarily take into account where the receiver of the feedback is psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, whereas feedback does take into account where you are at this point in time. Are you ready to get feedback, right? Readiness. And there is a great organizational consultant, Professor Ed Schein from MIT. And he did a lot of work in organizational consulting and organizational culture. And I read a lot of his work. I just finished reading a short book he wrote. It's called Helping. And he talks very, very clearly about how to give feedback and when to give feedback. And there are certain parameters to give feedback that will be heard. So in your case, Alfonso, maybe people gave you strong feedback and you were ready for it, and it was okay. And you improved as a result of it. You changed some things for the better, and that's wonderful. But most people when they hear harsh criticism, they tend to shut down as opposed to perking up and being ready for what's coming. So when I have to give feedback, I think I usually ask for permission. And I say to the person I'm talking to, you know, there is something that I wonder if I could share with you. Are you interested in hearing what I have to say? And depending on the person's reaction, then I can calibrate what to say, how to say, and there are some rules for giving feedback. It has to be specific, it has to be behavioral, it has to be close to the event you are criticizing. So there are certain parameters around giving a useful feedback.
Okay, thank you very much. It's like, yes, you need to adapt the feedback to the person. Yes, the other comment I have is about one of your graphs in which I believe you answered something in the same tone about Mexico and happiness.
Yeah.
But in one of your graphs, in your presentation graphs comparing countries, Germany had a high life satisfaction but a low level of justice. So I would like to know how can you explain it?
Right. I don't want to go back to the slides now because it will distract from the flow of the conversation. But I do want to say that countries have their unique profiles, right? Professor Shimizu was talking before about the nuances of Japanese culture, and I was talking about the nuances of Mexican culture and Colombian culture, for example. So we have to take all these cross-cultural comparisons with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, Germany, if I remember correctly, is not so low on the social justice index. They have pretty generous social welfare policies. But let me just not dive too deeply into any one aspect of these countries. I think the trends do apply. The higher the level of social justice, the higher the level of both of social capital, and the higher the levels of happiness.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.